I thought she was just my landlady, until the night her hand brushed through my hair, and she whispered, "Soft, I like it." From that moment, nothing between us felt the same. The story begins in the simplest of ways. A move into a new apartment. The narrator, a young man in his 20s, speaks with that blend of nervousness and relief anyone feels when starting fresh. He describes dragging boxes up narrow stairs, the sound of the old building creaking under his steps, and the faint scent of lemon polish that lingers in the hallway. It's not just a building. It feels like someone has cared for it, tended to it, given it character. That someone, he soon learns, is his landlady. She greets him at the door not with the stiffness of a landlord doing business, but with the calm, measured warmth of a woman who has hosted life within these walls for years. She's in her early 40s, her hair tied loosely as though she didn't plan to impress anyone. Yet every movement she makes is quietly graceful. She extends her hand to him. Not hurried, not formal, but steady. And in that handshake, he senses her natural authority. Her voice carries an even tone, almost like music against the hum of the refrigerator in the background. She explains the house rules, trash days, quiet hours, where to collect the mail. These are ordinary details, but he notices how they sound different when spoken by her. There's a firmness there, but beneath it, a subtle kindness. It strikes him that she isn't just keeping a building. She's protecting a space that matters to her. He finds himself oddly attentive to her gestures. The way she tucks a stray strand of hair behind her ear as she searches for the spare key. The way her sleeves slip down to her wrists when she points out the light switches. None of this feels charged yet, not romantic. Just human details that somehow lodge in his memory. She insists he sit for tea before continuing with unpacking. He's surprised. Most landlords he's met never lingered more than 5 minutes. She places a steaming cup in front of him, her hands steady, the soft clink of porcelain echoing through the small kitchen. The tea is simple, nothing fancy, no grand hospitality. Yet he notices how warm it feels in his palms, and how her presence makes the silence between them comfortable rather than awkward. In that moment, the tone of their relationship is quietly set. He isn't just a tenant to her, and she isn't just a name on his lease. There's something gentler at play, a rhythm of life they're both falling into without realizing it. When he returns to his apartment that night, tired from unpacking, he catches himself thinking about her. Not in a romantic way, not yet, but with curiosity. The steadiness in her voice, the way her smile seemed to soften the dim light of the kitchen. He doesn't know it yet, but what felt like an ordinary beginning is the first step into something far more unexpected. The first few weeks pass without incident. Life settles into a rhythm, work, errands, the occasional late-night meal on the go. Yet, in the quiet spaces of that rhythm, he finds himself noticing her more and more. Not deliberately, not with intent, but in those small, passing encounters that never seem important until they linger afterward. It begins on the staircase. He's carrying groceries, a little too many for one trip, and nearly drops a bag halfway up. She happens to come down at that moment, pausing on the steps with a light laugh as she steadies the bag before it slips. "Careful," she says, her tone a mixture of concern and amusement. He mutters a thanks, embarrassed at being caught clumsy, but her hand remains on the bag a heartbeat longer than necessary. Just long enough for him to feel the warmth of her touch through the thin paper sack. Later, in the garden behind the building, he sees her trimming a few overgrown branches. It's late afternoon, the sunlight low, painting her in shades of gold and shadow. She looks different here, not the composed landlady explaining rules, but a woman at ease, moving with quiet purpose. He offers to help, but she shakes her head. "I like the work," she says simply, tucking a stray lock of hair back with the back of her wrist, smudged faintly with soil. Something about that small, unguarded moment stays with him longer than it should. He begins to notice her more in passing, the way she tucks a shawl around her shoulders when evening air cools, the sound of her keys jingling lightly as she walks up the path, the subtle tiredness in her eyes at the end of long days. He realizes that while she always carries herself with composure, there's a quiet fatigue beneath it. Not weakness, but the sort of weariness that comes from years of holding things together. One evening, he finds himself behind her in line at the small corner store. She doesn't notice him at first, her arms cradling a basket of groceries. Milk, bread, a packet of tea. Ordinary things, but somehow the sight feels intimate, like a glimpse into the small routines that make up her life. When she finally turns and sees him, her smile is brief but genuine. A little surprised, like she hadn't expected company in that mundane moment. Their conversations remain light. Weather, building repairs, small talk about the neighborhood. Nothing remarkable on the surface. But he feels something shift in the spaces between words. She looks at him a little longer than necessary, her expression thoughtful, almost questioning. And he catches himself lowering his voice when speaking to her, leaning slightly closer as if drawn by something he doesn't yet dare to name. At night, lying awake, he replays these encounters. They don't add up to much, he tells himself. Just coincidence, just neighborly kindness. And yet, there's a spark in the memory of her laugh on the staircase, the warmth of her hand steadying his bag, the way her perfume mingled faintly with the smell of rain that evening. It's subtle, ordinary, almost nothing at all. But it's enough to stir the quiet beginning of awareness. It happens on an evening that begins with something completely ordinary. The hallway light outside his apartment has gone out, and he mentions it casually when they cross paths on the stairs. She frowns, says she'll call someone to fix it, but he waves her off. I can handle it, he offers, eager to be helpful. She hesitates for a moment, then nods with a faint smile that carries equal parts relief and appreciation. So he finds himself later that night standing on a chair in the hallway, fiddling with the light fixture. The bulb doesn't want to budge, and he mutters under his breath as he wrestles with it. She appears behind him, holding a small toolkit he hadn't even asked for. Thought you might need this, she says, her voice light but warm. When the bulb finally flickers back to life, they both laugh, the kind of small, unguarded laugh that feels less about the joke and more about the company. He steps down from the chair, brushing dust from his hands, and she thanks him, her tone softer this time. You've saved me from having to call someone and wait 3 days, she says. That's no small favor. It's a simple exchange, but there's something in the way her eyes hold his for a moment too long that makes the air between them feel heavier. She notices the smudge of dust in his hair and laughs again, reaching out without thinking. Her fingers brush through his hair lightly, almost playfully, shaking away the stray speck. But then her hand lingers. The gesture is so natural, so effortless, that it catches him off guard. Her fingertips graze his hair gently, and she tilts her head slightly, studying him with a kind of quiet curiosity. Soft, she murmurs, almost to herself, though he hears every syllable. Then, after the smallest pause, her lips curve into a smile. I like it. The words are casual, spoken with an ease that could pass for simple amusement. But for him, the moment lands differently. His breath hitches in his chest, and he's suddenly hyper-aware of how close she is, how the warmth of her hand lingers against his hair, how her perfume drifts faintly between them, how the hallway feels narrower with both of them standing there. He doesn't know what to say. He laughs awkwardly, a little too quickly, but she doesn't pull back immediately. Her gaze lingers for just a second longer before she withdraws her hand, smoothing her sleeve as though nothing unusual had happened. They part ways with a good night, her tone as even and composed as always. But as he closes the door to his apartment, he feels something different stirring in his chest. He leans against the door for a moment, running his hand through the same spot her fingers touched, as though trying to hold onto the sensation. It was such a small thing. A laugh, a touch, a single sentence. But it leaves the air charged in a way he can't ignore. After that night in the hallway, something changes. He tells himself it was nothing, that her words, her touch were playful, nothing more. But the memory lingers in ways he can't shake. It sneaks up on him while brushing his teeth, while pouring coffee, while staring blankly at his work screen. He keeps replaying the way her fingers combed lightly through his hair, the way her smile softened just before she spoke. And it isn't just him. The next few days, he notices her acting a little differently too. Nothing overt, nothing he could ever point to and say this means something. But there's a warmth in her voice that wasn't there before. A quiet ease when she stops to talk with him. She doesn't rush off as quickly, doesn't keep her tone strictly business. Her eyes seem to search his face longer than before, like she's waiting for something. Though what, he can't tell. One evening, as the sky turns deep blue outside, he hears a gentle knock on his door. It's her, holding a tray with 2 teacups and a pot. "Thought you might like some," she says simply. He can't help but smile. She didn't need to invite him, yet she did. He follows her back to her kitchen, the room softly lit by the warm yellow of a single lamp. The table between them feels smaller than usual, the air thicker somehow. They talk about nothing in particular, the weather, the neighbor's noisy dog, the way the city feels different at night. But beneath every word lies a hum of tension neither of them acknowledges. He notices her sleeve brush lightly against his hand when she reaches for the sugar bowl. She doesn't move away too quickly. His hand hovers for a second longer than it should. And in that pause, a quiet current runs through both of them. The teacups clink gently, the steam rising in thin ribbons. He finds himself watching her more closely than before, how her lips rest against the rim of her cup, how the lamplight casts shadows across her collarbone. He catches himself and quickly looks away, embarrassed only to find her gaze already on him. She doesn't scold, doesn't tease. She just holds his eyes with a soft, unreadable look. The conversation trails into silence, but it isn't uncomfortable. It's thick, weighted with everything unsaid. The ticking of the wall clock seems louder than usual, every second a reminder of how close they sit, how aware they've both become of the space, or lack of it, between them. For a fleeting moment he thinks she might reach out again, that she might close the distance like she did in the hallway. But she doesn't. She takes a small sip of tea instead, her lips curving just slightly into a smile, as if to say, not yet. When he finally returns to his apartment that night, the silence of his own space feels louder than ever. He realizes it's not just attraction pulling at him. It's something slower, heavier, an awareness that the ground beneath their simple tenant-landlady relationship has shifted, and there's no going back. It happens a week later, on one of those evenings when the world feels a little heavier than usual. He's coming home late, weary from a long day, when he notices her kitchen lights still on. The hour is late enough that he hesitates. Should he disturb her? But then he hears soft music drifting out the window, a gentle piano piece, and before he can second-guess himself, he finds his hand knocking lightly on her door. She answers in a cardigan, her hair loosely tied back, glasses perched on her nose. It's the most unguarded he's ever seen her. For a moment, she seems surprised, but then she steps aside, gesturing him in with a small smile. "I was just making tea," she says. "You look like you need some." They sit together at her table again, but the atmosphere tonight feels different. The weight of the day shows in her posture. Shoulders slightly slumped, movements slower. She makes a quiet joke about how she must look tired, brushing it off with humor. But he catches the way her fingers linger on the rim of her teacup, as if holding onto it for steadiness. The conversation drifts into more personal ground. He listens as she speaks, almost cautiously at first, about how life has been quieter than she ever imagined it would be at this age. About how she's learned to be independent, yes, but also how independence can sometimes feel like loneliness in disguise. She says it lightly, with a half-smile, but her eyes give her away. He doesn't interrupt, doesn't try to fix it. He just listens, and that, in itself, seems to open something in her. She leans back, her gaze softening, and admits that she doesn't often let people close anymore. Not because she doesn't want to, but because experience has taught her that closeness can come with its own set of costs. She doesn't go into detail. Whether it was a marriage that ended, or a love that faded, he doesn't ask. But he feels the quiet ache in her words. There's a pause then, not heavy but tender. He places his hand lightly on the table, close enough that his fingers brush hers. It's not bold, not dramatic, just a gesture of presence, of quiet reassurance. She glances at their hands, then back at him, and for a brief second, she looks almost vulnerable, like a woman who has carried strength for too long and is suddenly relieved to let a little of it slip. Her laugh comes then, small and self-conscious, as if she's embarrassed by her own openness. "Listen to me," she says, shaking her head. "I never talk like this." He smiles gently, meeting her gaze. "Maybe you just needed someone to hear it." The words linger between them, warm and steady. She exhales slowly, her shoulders easing. And though nothing more happens, no sudden embrace, no dramatic confession, the intimacy of that moment feels deeper than anything physical could. For the first time, he sees not just his landlady, not just the composed woman who manages the building. He sees her humanity, her fears, her history, her longing. And that changes everything. The storm arrives suddenly. By early evening, the sky has turned a bruised shade of gray, the wind pushing against the trees in restless waves. He's in his apartment, watching rain streak the window, when the lights flicker once, twice, and then snap out completely. Darkness swallows the room, save for the dull glow of the street lamps outside. A soft knock comes at his door. He opens it to find her standing there, holding a single candle in her hand, the flame flickering shadows across her face. "Power's out," she says with a half-smile. "Come downstairs. I've got a few more candles lit. Safer than sitting alone in the dark." He follows her into her apartment, now transformed by candlelight into something softer, more intimate. The storm rages outside, wind rattling the windows, rain striking hard against the glass. But inside, everything feels suspended, quieter, as though the world has narrowed to just the two of them. They sit together on the couch, shoulders brushing. At first, they make small talk, joking lightly about the storm, but the conversation fades quickly into silence. The closeness feels heavier tonight, more unavoidable. Each flicker of candlelight seems to deepen the shadows, drawing their faces closer, their breaths mingling in the stillness. When the thunder cracks sharply overhead, she startles slightly, her shoulder pressing more firmly into his. She doesn't pull away. Instead, after a hesitant moment, she lets her head rest gently against his shoulder. The gesture is subtle, yet it shifts everything. He doesn't move, barely even breathes, afraid to disturb the fragile weight of her leaning into him. Her hair brushes against his jaw, soft and fragrant, carrying the faint scent of rain mixed with her perfume. He feels his pulse quicken, every nerve attuned to the quiet rhythm of her breathing. Her hand finds his arm, not gripping, just resting, her fingertips grazing his sleeve as though anchoring herself there. The simplicity of it makes his chest ache. There's no performance in the gesture, no calculation. It's need, quiet and honest, wrapped in trust. They sit that way for what feels like a long time. The storm outside surges, the rain hammering against the windows, but inside, it feels like a cocoon. He dares to tilt his head slightly, enough to let his cheek brush against her hair. She doesn't move away. Instead, she exhales slowly, as though she's been holding her breath for years. Neither of them speaks. Words would only break what has settled between them. The silence is thick but tender, filled with everything they've held back. The glances, the hesitations, the moments of almost touch. When at last the storm begins to ease, the candle flickers lower, and still she doesn't lift her head. He realizes, with a mixture of awe and fear, that this isn't just an accident of the moment. This is a choice, a quiet, fragile step into something more. And though neither of them has said it aloud, they both know. After tonight, nothing can return to how it was. Morning arrives softly, as though the storm has left the world calmer in its wake. The rain has stopped, and sunlight filters gently through the curtains of his small apartment. He wakes later than usual, the memory of the night before still alive in his chest, the weight of her head on his shoulder, the warmth of her hand resting lightly against his arm, the silence between them that had said more than words ever could. For a moment he lies still, staring at the ceiling, replaying it all. A part of him wonders if she regrets it, if come morning, she'll pull back, retreat into formality again. The thought unsettles him, but it's quickly replaced by a quiet certainty. Last night wasn't an accident. It wasn't just the storm, or fear, or comfort. It was something they'd both been circling for weeks. Something neither of them had dared to name until now. When he finally makes his way downstairs, he finds her in the kitchen. She's already awake, already dressed in her simple cardigan, her hair loosely pinned back. The kettle whistles softly on the stove, filling the room with the smell of fresh coffee. She glances up when he steps in, and her expression softens in a way that eases every worry he had. "Morning," she says, her voice quieter than usual but steady. She sets 2 mugs on the table, gesturing for him to sit. They drink their coffee slowly, the morning light painting warm patterns across the table. At first, they speak about ordinary things, the storm, the power outage, how the garden must be soaked. The conversation feels like a bridge, a way of gently stepping from the world they knew into the one they're still learning to inhabit. But then the quiet returns, heavier, and she looks at him. Really looks, as though searching for the courage to put her feelings into words. "You know," she says softly, "I never expected any of this. Not at this point in my life." She laughs a little, but her laugh carries the weight of disbelief, even vulnerability. It feels strange to feel this alive again. Her words hang in the air, fragile but sincere. He meets her gaze, heart pounding, and answers just as simply, "I feel it too." It isn't a declaration, not a dramatic confession. It's an acknowledgement, a step into honesty. And that is enough. She exhales, relief flickering across her face. She doesn't reach for him outright, but her fingers drift close to his on the table. When their hands finally brush, she lets them linger, not pulling back this time. The warmth of that small touch is more powerful than anything else could have been. They don't promise forever. They don't map out the future. They don't need to. What they have now is enough. The understanding that something has begun between them, quiet but real, and that they will explore it at their own pace. As the camera of memory closes on the scene, the image is simple. Morning light spilling across her face, a soft smile curving her lips, his voice closing the story with the thought that love doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes, it arrives in quiet rooms, in small gestures, in the courage to let someone close again. And for them, that's more than enough. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more slow burn romances. And tell me in the comments, would you have let that moment between them grow into something more?